Hello, my wonderful friends. Welcome back to our ProRevenge channel, where you come to get your dose of satisfaction by listening to others getting what they deserve. In today's episode, we have 6 incredible stories. The first story is about how OP's dad steals his truck to teach him a lesson. The second story details how OP's wife starts her own business to retaliate against a terrible boss and ultimately destroys his company. The third story explains how OP shuts down a brewery. I hope you stay for these tales today, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for future stories. Let's dive in. The first story is titled, Malicious Compliance vs. ProRevenge. High school was tough for me because I was a forever friend-zone nerdy gamer guy. So I decided for my senior year that I was going to get out of Ohio and study abroad. I had slept through 3 years of German classes, but I applied to go to Germany anyway. I ended up getting a place in Salzburg, Austria, which is the most beautiful place on earth that I've visited to date, and I need to go back soon. The study abroad program gave a few warnings before I left. Don't get into criminal trouble, don't get bad grades, and don't fall in love. My only danger with the first one was my lead foot. I had totaled my first car but was allowed to drive my dad's 1995 Ranger, a 4-cylinder, 5-speed truck that barely got out of its own way. For the second warning, I did just enough to get B's without caring too much. As for the third, well, through some teenage angsty drama, I ended up meeting, dating, and falling madly in love with a girl who is now my wife and the mother of my daughter. At 17, I worked full-time during the summer. As I mentioned, my dad let me borrow his truck after I got off work. The rules were that I had to be home by 10 p.m. on weekdays and 11 p.m. on weekends. He justified this by saying that if I broke down or something, he'd have to come get me and fix the truck before he left for work the next day at 6 a.m. To my turbocharged teenage hormones, this felt like tyranny. I spent every moment I wasn't at work with my girlfriend because, well, spending time with her was amazing. Summer was quickly coming to an end, and I had to leave the country. The day before I was set to leave, my dad eased the restriction and said I could stay out until midnight. He also said I could be gone all day since we were leaving for New York City the next morning at 10 a.m. to catch my flight. That's when I hatched a plan. I was leaving the country, so I couldn't be given a worse curfew or extra chores, and my family wouldn't waste the study abroad money unless it was dire. I spent the whole day with my girlfriend and told her to wait up after I left because I had a surprise. I drove home and made it there at 11:58 p.m., crept into my room and spent the next hour instant messaging her. At 1 a.m., I rolled the truck down the driveway and headed back to her house, where I fell asleep with her in my arms. Life was perfect. I knew full well that I was breaking the intent but not the letter of the law. My argument was that my dad never said how early I could go to her house, and since I never woke up before noon, it was left unsaid. Perfect malicious compliance in my head. In the morning, I woke up at 9, just enough time for a teary goodbye, and hauled back home to head to New York City to fly to Vienna. But when I looked out the door, the truck was gone. I panicked, realizing I was a dead man. My trip was off, and I thought I'd have to work endless hours to pay my dad back for the stolen truck. I'd never have time to see my girlfriend, and I'd miss out on experiencing Europe like I wanted. I called my dad in a panic, only to hear deafening silence on the other end. This was my dad's ProRevenge. He had heard me roll in just before midnight and went to sleep. He didn't hear me roll out at 1 a.m. because years of playing Dungeons and Dragons had taught me how to be a sneaky archer type. But when he woke up at 6 a.m. and saw both the truck and I were gone, he knew there was only one place I could be. He and my stepmom drove to my girlfriend's house, and with the spare key he took the truck and went home. When he got my call a few hours later, he gave a full 30-second pause and then began yelling at me, saying I'd better find his truck or I'd never see the outside of my room again, much less my girlfriend or Austria. I was freaking out, running around her neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen the truck. I was about to call the cops when he called me back 5 minutes later, laughing his head off. He told me he took the truck, that I was in deep trouble, and I'd better get home fast. He made me get a ride home with my girlfriend and her mom. When I arrived, he was standing in the driveway, smug as ever. I got berated for the entire 6-hour drive to New York City about how foolish I was, but I left the country as planned. It all worked out in the end. I got the girl, who I'm happily with 17 years later, and the truck, until it died of Ohio rust 12 years later. This story was absolutely amazing. It had everything: action, suspense, revenge, and a happy ending where OP, the nerdy gamer guy, ended up with the girl. Oh yeah, and spending quality time with her, because who could forget that? The next story is titled, The Girl Friday with the PhD Takes Over the Business. My spouse was the second person hired at a consulting company in a very specialized industry. In her 15 years with the firm, it grew to a respectable 3-office entity with about 8 to 10 employees at each location. She and the owner grew the business through contracts, expertise, and her presentations. Her abilities and education were the main reasons new business came through the door. Over the years, her scope of responsibility grew so that the owner was basically 75% absent and mostly unaware of day-to-day activities. As he became more removed from the business, he would make overtures about eventually retiring and selling her the business. He was so dependent on her income generation that he even took out a life insurance policy on her. I didn't involve myself too much, but at a major industry dinner party I attended with her, he introduced her to the table as his Girl Friday, basically a secretary, which was odd. Over the years, she tried to get an agreement in place to buy the firm, even if it was years away. He always delayed and made promises but never followed through. I told her, "This guy doesn't respect you or your contribution. He will never sell you the business because there's no reason to. He can make more money by stringing you along. You are the business, so why would he sell it to you?" One day, out of the blue, my wife received a raise and bonus, a very small amount of money, and a contract that included a non-compete and non-disclosure agreement. After reading it, she realized the owner was trying to lock her down from leaving to another firm. To make things even more suspicious, she received a call from a competitor who said they were in the final stages of due diligence and wanted to meet her. The owner was selling the company and didn't think to tell her or ask if she was interested in buying it. She ignored the agreement, and since there were no other agreements in place, she was totally free. My wife is extremely loyal. She had missed countless special days working for this guy, and even skipped paychecks during tough financial times. She was furious. The maddest I've ever seen her. We discussed starting her own firm, and I asked how much business was contractually obligated to stay if she left. It turned out that most agreements were either handshakes or 30-day at-will contracts. I also asked how many clients would leave with her, and she estimated about 75%, including her biggest source of revenue, who didn't even know the owner. In a very short time, my wife took a 3-week vacation, during which she rented an office in the same building and made all the arrangements to set up a new shop. She agreed to leave any and all company property behind, and did her best to give the old company no obvious grounds for litigation. She called her clients and said, "I'm leaving. If you want to look into relocating your account with my new company, you'll need to quit the old one before we can discuss it." Most understood the implication. While she was on vacation, she received a panicked call from her boss. He said, "We lost the company. Do you know anything about it?" She replied, "I'm sorry, but I just sent you an email. I've resigned. All my keys and company stuff are on my desk. Goodbye." The new firm basically took 90% of the business and seamlessly transitioned into the same company as before, but with her as the new owner. Even most of the office staff eventually came aboard. Within a year, her old company closed down, except for the small office her old boss ran. She sees him once in a while, and he just scowls at her. The next story is titled, "I Destroyed a Brewery." Nearly 20 years ago, I was a brewer at a brew pub. The owner was a complete lunatic and an utterly terrible person. Before I was hired, he had already purchased brewery equipment from a closed microbrewery. The problem was that it was literally 4 times larger than needed for the size of the place. To top it off, he was also selling big-name commercial beers, and it was a Pugsley system. Brewers will understand. Nonetheless, I made it work. I even got the tricky Ringwood yeast to behave. But I only needed to brew about 3 or 4 times a month, so I wasn't needed anywhere near 40 hours a week. Since I was salaried, he decided I needed to work as a night manager at least 2 nights a week to fill out my hours. That was fine. It was an easy gig. After our first year, he advertised a huge anniversary event with specials on food and commercial beer, but didn't even mention that we made our own beer, much less put it on special. What a foolish move. Not long after, I got my first vacation in over a year. Life was stressful, not least because my mom was in hospice with stage 4 cancer. Her condition was such that she told my wife and me to go on our planned camping trip, assuring us she'd be fine. So, we went camping for a week. The day before our trip was to end, we got word that she had passed away 2 days earlier. My family didn't know how to reach us. Only she did. We rushed home, a 6-hour drive, and on the way I called my boss to tell him what happened, and that I probably wouldn't be in on Monday as planned since it was Saturday. I later found out from a bartender that he complained to the chef that I was probably going to want more time off. I did take Monday off, but went in on Tuesday for my night manager shift. My mom's wishes were to be cremated with no embalming, so by the time I got home, she was already cremated. The memorial service was planned for 2 weeks later, right before Labor Day weekend. There was to be a memorial service on Thursday and a family interment on Friday. I planned ahead and made sure the serving tanks were full so I wouldn't need to brew for at least a week. That Wednesday, the boss came to me and said he wanted me to work the night shift on Thursday and Friday to make up for the time I had taken off to help my dad, who wasn't handling it well. He wanted me to come in after my mom's funeral. I flatly refused. He said, "Fine, but you'll have to work a double shift on Saturday then." I nearly lost it. I walked away, and after I cooled off, I went back and told him I was no longer doing the manager shifts and wanted to switch to hourly pay for brewery work only. He was angry but stuck. He needed me in the brewery. Things started calming down, but after a few weeks, I noticed my paychecks were far less than I anticipated. I hadn't been tracking my clock-in and clock-out times closely because prior to this, I only clocked in and out for manager functions. But I happened to have a couple of payslips in my wallet, and since I still had manager access, I discovered he had been altering my hours, cheating me out of 20 hours in just 6 weeks. That's when I hatched my plan. I was done with this jerk. Remember that ringwood yeast? In a brewery, you harvest yeast from a fermenting batch to use for a later one. Since we were slow, it often had to be stored for a while before use, but you had to use it within 30 days, or it goes sour and starts dying. Normally I would take steps to ensure it stayed clean and healthy, but not on the last batch. I harvested it, put it in the cold room and left it there. I stopped going in very often and just logged the tank levels to make sure nothing ran out and made him suspicious. I would even go in on days I knew he wasn't there, and later messaged him that I'd brewed when I hadn't. I waited until day 45 after I got the check for the last hours I worked. Then I overnighted my keys with a resignation letter. He called me the next day, screaming. I told him I knew what he'd done and that I wouldn't be back. I don't know what he looked like when he went to the brewery cellar and discovered empty fermenters, nearly empty serving tanks, dead yeast, and almost no grain. It's a pity, really. After that, he tried to hire my former assistant, who was working at another brew pub. The assistant laughed at him. He then apparently got the underage son of a brewer at a nearby brew pub to brew for him, but had to fire him because the kid kept getting caught drunk in the cellar. So he tried brewing himself. I heard they stopped brewing entirely. About a year after I left, he folded. Staff showed up one morning to find padlocked doors. I drove through there a few years back. Not only was the brewery gone, but the building was torn down. I felt like stopping to scatter salt on the ground, but I was in a hurry. Altering someone's hours is a huge no-no, and OP could have gone after him since the hours were logged and kept on record. The next story is titled, "Did You Damage My Property? Your Family Will Be Taken." Let's dive in. This happened shortly after college. So, my mom's a retired, disabled woman who now owns her house on a quiet residential cul-de-sac. She's lived there longer than anyone else. Her neighborhood has designated parking spaces at the end of the cul-de-sac, all with the addresses of each house painted in the parking space. My mom doesn't get out much, so I use her designated parking space. At the time, we lived in the same city and I came by weekly to bring groceries, fix broken things, cook for her, etc. My mom parked her car in the backyard of her house since she went out so little. My mom's neighbor, Ivy, never parked well. Whenever I stopped by, her car was always parked so close to my car that I had to park on the curb. I wouldn't have cared about Ivy's lousy parking, but for two things. One, she had 4 or 5 kids and had parties almost every weekend, leaving trash in my mom's yard. Two, I loved my car. It was a 2016 metallic ice blue Dodge Challenger Hellcat, the first car I've ever purchased brand new. I washed that car once a week, detailed the interior, and had rules against eating, drinking, or even leaving trash in my car. It was my pride and joy. My mom had called the police throughout Ivy's residence because of parties. Ivy's friends would fill up the cul-de-sac with their cars, obstructing traffic, and get into loud, drunken fights at and after midnight. I often found empty beer bottles, empty condom wrappers, cigarette butts, and empty crack baggies on the fence between the properties, but it was mostly on Ivy's side of the fence. This is all important information. One Saturday, while having dinner at Mom's house, I hear a loud crash, and then my car alarm went off. I ran outside to see Ivy's older model Honda Accord back out of her parking space and speed down the street. Ivy's Accord had a dent from the front bumper to the door, and the headlight had popped out. I approached my challenger with trepidation and screamed in anguish at what I saw. My car, my beautiful 3-week-old car with less than 500 miles on it, had a dent stretching from the passenger's door to the front bumper, and the right front wheel was tilted at a 30-degree angle. I was livid. I called the police, filed an online claim with my insurance, and arranged for a tow truck to take my damaged car to a dealership. The estimated cost of repairs came out to about $6,500. I had a low insurance deductible, about $100, but my car was parked, and Ivy owed for the damages. For 2 weeks, I knocked on Ivy's door or waited for her to come home. She stopped driving her damaged Accord and either rented or borrowed a Ford Fusion. When she was home, she didn't answer the door. When she wasn't, she stayed away until my rental car, a Dodge Charger, left my mom's parking space. I left a note on Ivy's door for her to call me, but only received harassing calls from restricted phone numbers or people blaring air horns in my ear when I answered. So, the revenge. About 2 weeks after the incident, Ivy's children came to my mom's house for some cookies. I noticed that 2 of them had bruises around their eyes. If Ivy hadn't hit my car, I still would have done what I did, but maybe not as underhandedly. I had my mom take pictures of all the children, but waited until the next party to strike. Ivy had a party that night or the night after. Mom called to let me know, and I installed an app onto my phone that gave me a fake phone number. I called 911 and reported the party. I said, "There's a loud party at 1007 Mountain Drive, and I'm worried because the children there are all around these drunken adults. Please hurry." Mom called to let me know the police arrived. I drove to her house and saw Ivy and her boyfriend, Bain, sitting in the back of a squad car. From a news broadcast that night, I found out that Bain had warrants for his arrest. Initially, the charges were disorderly conduct and disturbing the peace. However, my mom turned over the photos of the children, and less than a week later, Ivy and Bain were charged with abuse charges. I think Bain was charged with more severe charges as well as for abusing Ivy's daughter. Either way, the children ended up in foster care, and Ivy and Bain ended up in prison. Guys, the moral of the story is, if you hit a parked car, own up to it, because you may lose your kids and go to jail anyway. Guys, OP has an update on his Hellcat since everybody in the comments was wondering if it got fixed or not. He said, "My car, I named her Nikki, was fixed after that accident. Unfortunately, in December of last year, a woman ran a stop sign and plowed into her at 45 miles per hour. The airbags deployed, and the structure was so badly damaged that Nikki was totaled out and was an insurance write-off. What a shame." My next-door neighbor used to have a Challenger Hellcat. I'm pretty sure he tuned it to like 800 horsepower or something, and always took it to the track. Those are wicked awesome cars. The next story is titled, "My Freaky Former Boss." I spent 2 years working for a particular boss who I'll call Dan. Dan was, and almost certainly still is, the most unacceptable human being that I've ever had the displeasure of encountering. He was a compulsive liar, a narcissist, short-tempered, unethical, unreasonable, unintelligent, and abusive. I once witnessed him spend half an hour shouting at a salesman for wearing shoes that Dan didn't approve of. Not inappropriate shoes, mind you, but ones that Dan didn't like. The person in question could have gone home and changed his shoes in the time that Dan spent cursing him out and belittling him. This man not only assaulted me, but verbally and emotionally abused me for the better part of 2 years and did everything in his power to keep me under his thumb. He constantly micromanaged me to the extent where he would just dictate what I should write in an email to a client. If it wasn't done exactly his way, it wasn't correct. I had to argue with him just to get a darn sick day, even though I'm legally entitled to one. I was woefully underpaid and on call 24/7. This made it difficult for me to find other employment, and is one of the reasons I stayed as long as I did. He made my life absolutely miserable, and I developed a bit of a drinking problem as a result. I could go on and on about the things this man did, but this is pro-revenge, not bad bosses, so I'll get to the story. So, one day, Dan and I had a disagreement about something. I was right and had the emails to prove it, and I was frankly fed up with all his junk. I told him I wouldn't be going into work because I was taking a sick day. He proceeded to shove me down to the ground, as he's a big guy, and starts trying to strangle me. I was able to fend him off and escape, and after I did, file a police report. He actually had one of his other subordinates make a claim that the alleged assault didn't happen. Said subordinate wasn't there at the time, so false report. I naturally told everyone I knew. I told all his clients that contacted me afterward that I had filed a police report against him for assault. I specifically said it that way because, unlike simply claiming that he assaulted me, telling people I filed a report was unarguably true and not slanderous. A very close family friend of mine, Carol, was naturally one of the first to hear about the assault. I left the country about a month later in search of better opportunities, but Carol remained. She became the chairman of the board of trustees for the body corporate of the neighborhood where Dan lived, and Carol set her sights on making Dan's life hell. Dan had a broken-down car. It's been broken for over a year at that point, and he never had the money to fix it, and the rules of the neighborhood were changed to force broken-down cars to be towed away. If the owner didn't tow it, the body corporate would, and charge the owner, and fine them. So Dan was fined a few times. It wasn't small amounts either. And when he was fined, he did what he always does when things don't go his way. He threw a tantrum while having no leg to stand on. The tantrum in this case was several expletive-filled emails to the body corporate, which got him fined again for breaking the conduct code. This, combined with the loss of revenue for his business, has led him to not having any substantial income for over half a year now. He has no car nor the money to buy one, and several of his big clients are definitely not going to renew contracts with him. And he appears to no longer have any staff employed. Nobody's seen anyone coming to his house in months now, and the body corporate is pressuring his landlord to evict him. I'm happily living in another country now and got an awesome job that pays 20 times what working for him did. Guys, I dream of the day my crappy boss puts his hands on me so I can shut down his freaking company. He's a nice guy. I'm just kidding. So, there's an update that OP posted, and the update says, I've been informed that Dan was found dead in his home. The police have determined that it was not accidental or natural death, but someone targeted him. The rest of the details are still unclear, but I can only presume he finally picked a fight with someone who could go toe-to-toe with him, and Dan lost. The next story is titled, Do 2 points not matter? Tell that to your job. A bit of background first. My 8th grade year of middle school, we had one of the teachers leave at the very beginning of the year to go teach at another district. So the school's administration had to find a replacement in very little time. And about 2 weeks into the school year, they hired a teacher who I'll call Miss E immediately. She gave off a vibe that screamed, I'm only nice when my boss is in the room. The next few months went by, and the majority of the students who had her as a teacher all agreed that she had no idea how to teach, nor did she make any effort to show students some respect. I'm talking daily incidents of her picking on the class, complaining about not getting work done, and then wasting 20 minutes of class time while complaining. Miss E was also the type of teacher to pick favorites and pick on kids who she didn't like as much. She absolutely hated me, as I often made a point to start messing with her during class after realizing what kind of person she really was. In May of that year, we were finishing a unit on a book and took a test on it. The test was created by Miss E and had a lot of errors in it. Some of the test questions referred to very small details of the book or contradictory story pieces that made no sense. We got the test back a week later, with the highest grade in the class being a 70%. This clearly isn't right, so a few of us went to talk to her about it, even showed evidence from the book that some of the questions she marked wrong happened to be right. Miss E refused to listen to any of us and told us all to sit down. She got up and went on about how she felt, word for word, personally attacked and undermined, and had something made up about how 2 points don't matter when our concern was focused on the whole test. The next thing she starts talking about is my personal grade and how I went to her and attacked her about my grade. This went on for a while, mainly back and forth between me and her for about 2 days. At times, people would speak up and agree, but in the end, it turned out to be a debate between Miss E and I. So, what did we do? After the first day, as soon as I got home and turned on my computer, I opened Gmail and wrote about 4 pages worth of descriptions and complaints to our principal and the vice principal. I was brought down to the office the next day, where I was given detention written by Miss E, given for insubordination, intrusive undermining, and disrupting instruction. It was total nonsense, so I told him I wasn't going. He asked me to verify most of the information and elaborate on some of the incidents I described. His idea was to have me form a group of all the people involved and have us write a list of complaints and incidents from the class. And if everything cleared up, I'd get off without punishment. As a group of about 10 students, we wrote 17 pages of grievances and evidence that Miss E was clearly not fit for teaching middle school students. The principals read it all at once, and for the next week, instead of class time, we worked on other classes while the principal interviewed everyone in the class, including Miss E after it was. All over, Miss E was required to give a formal apology, where she spouted some fake tears and a nonsense written-up apology that ignored the majority of the problems that we were actually referring to. My detention was waived, and the next year she was no longer teaching in our school district. After reading these stories, I've been thinking a lot about them. I absolutely loved the malicious compliance versus pro-revenge story. It's a hilarious tale of teenage rebellion turned parental masterstroke. I chuckled at the kid's sneaky plan to bend the curfew rules, thinking he was untouchable, only for his dad to flip the script with that truck theft prank. It reminds me of my own youthful antics. Revenge like that builds character, and the happy ending with the wife and kid makes it wholesome. The girl Friday with the PhD takes over the business one hits home as pure empowerment. I admire how the wife turned betrayal into triumph, poaching clients and staff ethically after years of loyalty. That boss undervaluing her expertise? Classic corporate folly. I'd cheer her on. Starting her own firm and watching the old one crumble is satisfying pro-revenge. I destroyed a brewery, had me rooting for the brewer from the start. The owner's greed and insensitivity during the employee's grief were despicable. I'd have quit too, but sabotaging the yeast and operations? Genius, slow burn payback. It's a cautionary tale. Don't cheat workers or your business ferments into failure. The "did you damage my property? Your family will be taken" story is intense and dark. I get the rage over the wrecked Hellcat. Cars like that are treasures. But escalating to tipping off authorities about child abuse feels extreme, even if justified. It worked, but I wonder about the ethics. Revenge shouldn't cost innocence, though owning up could have prevented it all. My freaky former boss is nightmare fuel. Dan sounds like a monster. Assaulting an employee? Unforgivable. I love how the revenge unfolded through connections, leading to his downfall and possible murder. It's cathartic. I'd toast to escaping that toxicity and thriving abroad. Finally, do 2 points not matter? Tell that to your job shows student power done right. Miss E was a bully teacher, and I applaud the kids uniting with evidence to oust her. That apology was fake, but the outcome? Sweet justice. Proves standing up changes systems. And that brings us to the end of our pro-revenge series. Guys, if you didn't catch the last episode of our pro-revenge, OP gets access to his boss's computer and finds images that land the boss some jail time for a very, very long time. So go check it out if you haven't, and I'll see you guys in the next one.